Welcome back to Your Passion, Purpose, and Personal Brand. I'm Lisa McGuire. This season, we've been talking about the quiet breaking point so many high achievers reach. That's the moment I call successfully stuck. From the outside, everything looks impressive, but inside, something essential is no longer willing to keep performing, overfunctioning, or carrying the emotional weight of leadership alone. In my recent conversation with Graham Alcott, we explored why kindness and humanity are becoming the new leadership advantage. Today, we're taking that further with someone who spent over 20 years inside the systems that shape and often strain women who lead. Deborah Mitchell, founder of KindShift, knows this territory intimately. After working with organizations like Capital One, Deloitte, and Booz Allen Hamilton, she saw the same pattern everywhere. Women weren't burning out because they weren't capable. They were burning out because they were carrying too much of what leadership was never meant to demand. Her work is grounded in a simple truth. You can care without caring, and clarity is kindness. KindShift isn't a leadership theory. It's a return to yourself. It's the shift from performance to presence, from people-pleasing to grounded authority, from self-abandonment to self-alignment. And when women make that shift, they don't just lead differently, they lead in the way the future of business actually requires. So let's dive in and welcome Deb to the show. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you, Lisa, so much. I'm so happy to be here with you and have this great conversation.
It is going to be a great conversation. And you know, I love when people make powerful statements. It's like drawing a line in the sand. So this statement that we have, I want to start with is, the world doesn't need louder leaders. It needs braver, more human ones. Where did you first sense that we were entering this paradigm shift?
I feel like we've been entering this paradigm shift for quite a while, but it's gotten really a lot louder in the last probably 5 years. I want to say since COVID. COVID changed our dynamics so much. And with working remotely, we had to lead differently, and louder leadership showed up a lot after the first few months. Once we knew that being at home was going to be a norm, and I always believed in braver leadership, so that's where I went.
All right. And you've spent 2 decades inside of those Fortune 500s and major consulting firms.
Yes.
So when did you begin to notice the gap between how leaders were expected to show up and how they were actually, or what they were actually craving?
So I started my career in technology, and my first career was in sales. And so I noticed it there. But I want to talk about in consulting and being in the Fortune 500. What I really noticed was, as a mid-level and senior level manager, part of your day-to-day job is managing teams. And in some places I worked at, you were called career managers, and other places you were called people managers. And what I found is that role was a side of desk. It wasn't a part of your overall performance review. You might get some feedback like, is Deb being a good people manager or career manager? But it wasn't really seen as something providing tremendous value when it came to your overall job description and your job performance review. I only had one job in my career where it was a significant portion. As a senior manager, 15% of my performance rating was how well I was performing as being a people manager. And one year I was working on this project that was huge. Pretty much every single person in the United States now uses it. It has to do with the banking system. And I was working almost 24 hours a day because we had this crazy deadline, and I wasn't spending enough time with my people. And I missed going from getting the rating scale was a 5 being the lowest, 1 the highest, and I got a 2. And they said the only reason you don't have a 1 is because you didn't spend enough time with your people. And it was like, it really was. It was such an eye opener for me that I had put the client and that work above the people who really needed me. And I made changes immediately.
I think you're not alone in that, Deb,
Yeah.
because if we look, there's pressure. We've got profits, we've got the operations, we've got deadlines, and we've got delivery. And so when that is put in front of us and you know that it needs people to make it happen, but when we put our efforts towards that outcome and we neglect to realize that it's the people around us that are making that outcome happen, I don't think that is something that you owned on your own. I think other people get that too.
Yeah. And I think that's the disconnect of
Mm-hmm.
leadership. We have values and we say that we're going to do these things, but when push comes to shove, we often fall back onto our reflex of just focusing. Sometimes it's not that it's not the right thing, because we need to take care of our clients and make a profit or we won't have a business, but not at the expense of our people. And that's, I think, where the disconnect is.
Yes. And I think that's the shift that's happening. And thus why we're talking
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
So, one of the lines from your work that just stopped me when I was reading, was kindness is not weakness. Kindness is your leadership advantage. Why do you think kindness has been so understood in the corporate world?
It's such a great question. I think that kindness is often perceived as being nice at all costs and not holding people accountable, not driving to get the results or the KPIs. But what I learned early and try to always emulate is that being kind is being clear, telling people what's expected of them, what are the consequences if we fall short of that, like what does that mean? And it really is about holding people accountable, and it's about having the conversations that we need to have so that we can keep growing and moving together. And so I think kindness is perceived as a weakness because people don't equate it to being accountable, being results driven. And that's a misperception, because as a leader in Fortune 500 companies, I was tremendously successful both in delivering against all of my goals and my KPIs, but also in developing incredible teams. Every single person who's ever worked for me in my career who wanted to advance in their career to be promoted has been promoted. Every single one of them, because I took the time to understand what was important to them. And some people, being promoted wasn't what was important, but that's kindness. And that generated people who were loyal, who were engaged, who really wanted to succeed with the company they were at.
And that example that you gave, that is what I see as true leadership. I think a lot of times people look at leadership as, oh, I'm in this position and I have this power and this is how I can advance, and leave their team by the wayside, or if their team can make them look good, right? But the fact that everyone was able to make some type of career move, I mean, that really shows that you poured into them.
Yeah. And it's also things, Lisa, like I always had one-on-ones with my teams every week. And it wasn't about me. It was all about them. And it was an opportunity for them to share, whether it was work related or family. I wanted to know who my people were, both inside and outside of work. And one question I would always ask, and it was hard. At first, it felt a little bit like a gut punch, but I would always ask, what's one thing you think I should know, but you're afraid to tell me?
Oh, wow. That's an amazing question.
It's an amazing question. And people were really honest, but people were honest because I created a culture that allowed them to do that. And man, one of the things that I got feedback from was, Deb, you say no a lot. And he said, and I know that like 95% of the time you're right, but you have to let us find that out for ourselves. I was like, and I literally wanted to say, I do not. But I paused and I said, wow, that's, thank you. Thank you for that feedback. And then I asked, would it be okay if I checked in with you every couple of weeks to see how I'm doing on that? I really want to work on that.
Oh, that's amazing.
And he said, yes. And so every couple of weeks in our one-on-ones, we would have a check-in on that. And I improved a lot. And, you have to be willing to ask the questions. That's kindness. Kindness is about being able to ask questions, take the feedback without being defensive, and figure out, is that real? Does that really resonate with me? Or is it just a one-off? And then if yes, how do I start to make those changes? Incrementally. Yeah.
Yes. And that leads to this next question. All right. So give an example. I would love to know about how courageous kindness turns chaos into clarity, especially in moments of organizational change, because I know you're very active in organizational change.
Yeah. I'll give you an example of a recent client. I had a client that brought me on to help them to create a governance structure for their commercial revenue team. And it was a landlord-based agency or organization, so revenue generating was really big. And they thought it was like, I just need you to come in and tell us how we review revenue deals. And so when they brought me in, I did probably like 20 stakeholder interviews. And I realized that this was not a governance problem. This was a trust problem. And so I was hired by a gentleman in the C-suite. So I had to have a hard conversation. And I called him and I said, okay, I've had this interview, and from up and down your staff, the highest level to the lowest level, I said, this is a trust problem. He says, thought you were going to tell me that. And I said, well, so I need to know, like, are you willing to address that? And he said, well, and I said, I'm going to just be honest with you. If you don't want to address the trust problem, I can build you a really great governance framework, but it's not going to work. So I really think we should address the trust problem, and we might be able to do both. And he said, okay, what would that look like? And I walked him through what that would look like. Like, we can build a governance program that builds in, like, how do we teach people at the lower level to do the due diligence that you want to see at the C-suite? Like, make it part of a learning process and a mentoring process versus a reprimand. Anyway, so we talked through that, and he said yes. And then we built that, and then we brought it back to all the people we talked about. We said, how does that feel? How does this resonate? And they gave feedback. We tweaked, and then we piloted it. But to me, that's courageous kindness, because I'm a solopreneur. This was a really big contract. And I was essentially saying, I don't think you should pay me to do a governance framework if you're not going to do this. And I'm not going to do it because I know it won't work. And the C-suite leader, he was newly appointed, and he needed to make this work. And he needed to make it work in a short amount of time. So it took courageous kindness for him to say, yeah, I know I have to address this. Let's do it. And it was successful. And we piloted it for 3 months, and they're in their second pilot, and it's working.
You know, the thing I love about that is, or that really sticks out to me, is the piece when you went to him and he said, I was afraid of that, right? Like, he probably knew on a subconscious level, but that, okay, I'm bringing in the professional to tell us exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And then when you brought back the trust piece, that would shine a lot of light on him. So to put the scaffolding of the governance piece, I think, that was brilliant, Deb.
Yeah, thank you. And it worked.
Yes, that's the other thing. That's good. That's great about it. Yeah. So you work with high-performing women at inflection points.
Yeah.
They're exceptional at what they do, but exhausted from carrying everything. Mm-hmm. What are they carrying that most people can't see?
They're carrying over responsibility. They're the person on your team that you always go to because you know they're going to say yes. You know they're going to see something that somebody else doesn't see. You know that they're going to get to the problem. So they say yes, and they keep saying yes. And they're just, quite honestly, they're overwhelmed because they're managing so many projects, so many critical projects. They're the responsible one, and they're doing it at the expense of themselves. They're doing it at the expense of their family. They're doing it at the expense of their friends. It really is tough, but they don't know how to have the conversations to get some balance, to talk about maybe some trade-offs, maybe like some priorities. How do I delegate? How do I bring some other people along? So they're literally, if you look in your office and you look your left to your right or on your Zoom screen, they're the person that everybody goes to and they say yes pretty much every time.
Mm-hmm. And, we notice this quite often that it is a female that is carrying this. What is your thought about how did we get there?
I think women in general are just, we're raised to be nurturers. We're raised to be caretakers. And honestly, even at the conference I was in last week, I was talking to a really good friend of mine who lives in Houston. And he talked about, he's got 2 boys and 2 girls. And he talked about like what he really wants to do with his sons and getting them, blah, blah, blah. And I said, what about your daughters? Like, they're going to have to survive in our world. And I think it's something that society that sort of puts it on. And I think also what happens is when we as women, I don't want to use the word push back, but when we try to advocate for ourselves, we can get labeled as being too sensitive, not being a team player. I used to be told I was sensitive all the time. And I said, I know, it's my superpower. Isn't it amazing? So I think it's hard for us. We don't really learn how to advocate for ourselves in a healthy way. And that's kind of what I teach people in kindship is how to be authentic and advocate for yourself.
Yes, and I think you're exactly right. I think this conditioning and even the word that came to mind for you, pushback, right? As if it were wrong. But this advocating and standing up for yourself and having to navigate a culture that always has not been welcoming to women having a voice. I think this is amazing work that you're doing to be able to bring that forward.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it.
So there is a line in your bio, kind shift is not about leadership theory. It's about helping women stop abandoning themselves at work. What does self-abandonment look like in leadership?
Yeah, it looks, you should ask my husband this question. He'd be able to answer it like this. It would be like, it's really, we talked about this a little earlier. You're always saying yes. You're putting your work, you're putting your work commitments, your professional commitments ahead. It could also be you're putting your volunteer commitments because we like to serve. So not only are we serving at work, we're serving on boards and we're serving in nonprofit organizations. So it shows up, it's abandoning, like for me, most recent example, I had a client, I volunteer at a equine therapy center in Clifton, Virginia. Never ridden a horse, had never been around horses, but I heard about this program and I had to be part of it. I volunteer every Monday morning. And I had a client who said, well, I really want to meet Monday morning to have a team session. And I said, yes. And that meant I couldn't do my horses. And I can only do the horses on Monday because it's the only day we don't see clients. So it's a shorter shift. And so I didn't see my horses for 4 months. I gave that up when we could have had that meeting any time of the day on Monday, but I was afraid to say no. That's how it shows up. I was afraid to say no. And so I gave up my horses, which doing my volunteer work is part of my core of self-care, how I take care of myself. And so that's an example of how we lose ourselves.
Yeah. And that's so easy to do. I've seen that so many times where people have something and then when a client calls, we drop everything, right? Because it's business. It's business.
Yeah. Yeah. I've missed doctor's appointments. I've missed events with friends. I mean, there's this something that says, oh, I come second, And so I know most of us don't listen anymore, but when you're on an airplane and they say, put your mask on first, we really need to do that in our lives, because if we're not getting oxygen, we're not taking care of ourselves, we really can't be the givers that we are. We can't be the leaders that we are, because eventually there's not enough left.
Right. We're not going to bring our best to whatever it is that we're doing. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Deb, you teach leaders to say the hard thing earlier make
Yeah.
decisions without spiraling, and set boundaries without guilt. What's one practice someone listening could use today to shift from that anxiety to
Yeah.
anchored clarity? What's something would be an easy win for them?
So the easiest win, and I do this all the time, is a pause. And I do a pause and a 3 breath reset. But when we feel triggered and whatever that is, or we feel activated, before we respond, before we say yes or before we say no, just pause for just a moment. It literally takes a moment and just think, what is my intention in this conversation? How do we both come out of this conversation whole? And it just is enough to just reset you out of maybe a reactive or saying yes to something you want to say no to, or saying no to something that it's really okay. And you can do that without apology, without over explaining. So pausing you can do anytime, anywhere. Nobody even has to know you're doing it, because you're just, and then you respond.
Yeah. That pause is powerful.
Oh, it's incredible. I wish I knew about it sooner in my life, but now I know. So I share it with everyone.
And now so that does the audience. We all know now. All right,
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
take that pause. Deb, your kind shift compass and cohort experience help leaders build sustainable habits.
Mhm.
So first of all, maybe tell us what the kind shift compass is
Yeah.
and a little bit about the cohort experience. And then I'll go into following up with that.
Okay. So the kind shift compass is based on the 4 C's of kind shift, which is center, connect, communicate, and cultivate. And it's an assessment that tells you, where do you lead from? What is your most natural tendency to lead from? And how does that help you? And what are maybe some of your blind spots? I combine that with, for people in the cohort, we also do the everything disc manager assessment, because kind shift, the compass tells you like how you perceive yourself and how you naturally lead. And the disc helps you understand how others perceive you. And so we weave those together so that you get the whole picture.
Yeah, that would be a great. And how long does it take to take that compass?
The compass assessment takes about 7 minutes. And it's very quick. Yeah.
All right. Well, that sounds really like a no-brainer there. So what changes most quickly when someone begins this type of work, and what might take a little bit longer?
Yeah. So we just finished our founding cohort, and overwhelmingly what changed for people very quickly was using like pause, and I have other tools like the 3 breath reset, is they were able to just sort of regulate themselves before going into a meeting, before having conversations. And it was really helpful for them, because they started to ask themselves questions. What else could be true, rather than assuming they knew what was going on? I always tell people we make movies in our heads about what we think is going on. They're almost never true. And they're never a rom-com. They're usually whatever your worst nightmare is. So it really helped them to just kind of get into a space where they could be open and intentional about what they were doing. So we noticed that immediately. And then what grew over time, but by like the midway point, they were not just practicing having hard conversations with people that they already had a lot of trust with, but they were able to start having them where there was more at risk. And they were able to do that successfully. And like one example is one of the women in the cohort, she had someone who worked for her who was habitually late on getting deliverables done and wouldn't give any notice. She would reach out and say, hey, I was expecting this at 2, and the person wouldn't respond. And then it would go into the weekend, and her weekend would be ruined because the person wouldn't have gotten the work done. And it was because the person didn't know how to do it. So there was clearly a lack of clarity, clear as kind. What is expected? What do you need? Is there some sort of format? Is there something I can look at that, what does good look like? that was missing. So she was able to have those hard conversations with her employee about, hey, this isn't okay. Here's what we need to do. Hold her accountable for not getting the work done, but also be more clear on what she needed, when she needed, and how that person could ask for help.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Just to have the clarity to know even what to do. I think that's really something. That's the clear is kind piece, right?
Yeah, that is.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you can't tell, I've been doing some research, Deb. And so I've dug into your website and found a couple of stories I would love to get your reflection on. The first is a story about a leader supporting her team through an unexpected loss. And so that was about balancing humanity with operational reality.
Yeah.
What did that moment teach you about modern leadership?
That one hit super close to home for me because for those who didn't read my website, this leader came into the office and they had found out that one of their employees hadn't shown up for work in a couple of days, and someone got worried. They did a safety check and found out that the woman had passed away in her home. It was horrible. It was a very close community. And it really brought something home to me about how she handled it, because they didn't just pretend that it didn't happen. They didn't send out just an HR announcement. They just leaned into it and said, we are here. Let's talk about what's happening. Do you want to share stories about her? Tell us how you're feeling. They brought in some grief counselors to be able to deal with that. And I'm just going to compare it to my own personal experience. About, I want to say 8 years ago now, my younger sister, who now lives close to me, was in a horrible, horrible motorcycle accident. Her partner of 9 years was killed. My sister was hurt really, really bad. I got on a plane immediately to be up there for her. I ended up being there a month because she was in 24-hour rehab. And my leadership at my job at the time didn't tell my team a word. They just said I was having a family situation. No one knew what had happened. And I remember feeling so hurt, like, why does nobody care? Like, why isn't anyone reaching out? It was really it was awful. And it ended up making me leave the company, to be honest with you, to have gone through something where I almost lost my sister and she needed that kind of care. And nobody said a word. And nobody said a word when I came back. So that difference was so profound. Yeah, I could cry when I think about that. But my sister's good now, and she lives really close to me, and she moved to Virginia, and it's a happy ending.
Yeah, some good came out of that. But even when you were talking about that story, the one that was from your website, like, I had chills thinking about that, because so many times we in companies have the corporate mask that we wear, and we have to do this for HR, and we can't talk about things. And these are people that you eat lunch with. These are people that you're in the trenches trying to solve a problem with. These are not robots. And I can imagine being on the other side, thinking these people you were close to, and then no one even reaching out. I can understand why you left. That was really, really hard. Another story that you tell is about a heavy week meeting, where a leader opened by acknowledging emotional weight. Why are leaders so afraid to do that?
I think it goes to what you said before about, we have this corporate mask, and we have these things we're allowed to talk about, what we're not allowed to talk about. And so we have policies that said we can't talk about what's going on politically. We can't talk about what's going on in the world with all of these heavy things. So we expect somehow that our employees walk in the door and they hang that up with their coat. And it's simply not true. I mean, we bring with us everything that's happening in our lives and what's happening in the world. And it's not about being political or right or wrong, but it's acknowledging that it's hard to show up and pay attention and be engaged and be productive when there's a lot of really heavy stuff going on in the world. So that's brave kindness and brave leadership to acknowledge that. And you have to facilitate those discussions because it's not, you don't want to get into his right or wrong, but just acknowledge that there's a lot going on. We hear it, we see it, we recognize it. And if you need help, if you need someone to talk to, if we need to talk about that, I'm here. Like we have to do that for our people. The world is really hard right now.
Yes, it is. And I believe the thing is yes, the world is hard and you have a very difficult time leaving that, because when we see things that impact us, it impacts our nervous system, right? So if our nervous system is dysregulated, that might indicate that maybe we can't make clear decisions, or our stress level might be a little high. So our fuse might be a little shorter, right? So it explains and gives us some context for that. I think it's really, really important that we do have those with the boundaries needed, of course, like when you cross into that line. But I think that's a really good point. Yeah. We are at a threshold, Deb, where presence, you and I talk a lot about that, matters more than performance, and clarity matters more than control. What do you believe the future of leadership, now that we're here in this time, what is the future of leadership demand of us?
That's a big question. I believe to the core of my being that leadership demands of us empathy, compassion, and clarity. We have to start being able to put ourselves in the shoes of others. We have to be curious. We have to really want to know who our team is, who are our employees, who are our bosses, who are our peers, and we have to know them as whole people. We are whole people. We come to work with all of our perfections, imperfections, our skills, but we're one person. And I think, if nothing else, it's being more curious about who we are as humans and having compassion, having empathy, and just really helping people succeed. I used to always tell my teams this, and I tell my clients this: my job is to get you where you want to go. And if where you want to go is my job, great. I'm going to help you get there, because that means there's something else that I should be doing. And I just think we need more of that. We need more of understanding who people are and what they need and where they're going, and doing what we can to help them get there.
Yeah, we are truly better together. We really are. We really are.
We are. Yeah, I believe that to my core.
Yes. Yeah. So if every listener took one courageous action in the next 24 hours to lead more humanly, what would you want that action to be, Deb?
I would ask the question, tell me one thing you don't think I want to hear. Just ask. You'll be so surprised, in a good way.
Yeah. No, I think because we're always looking for that feedback. We want to get better, right? And it's when we can do it in a safe space without that emotion that, we can do that improvement. So
one other quick thing, and I know we're probably out of time, but one other thing is that as leaders, our team is rooting for us, unless we're just a jerk. But most of the time, our team is rooting for us. They want us to ask those kinds of questions. They're rooting for us. Yeah. Let them help you.
Yeah, that's a really great point. That's really, really, really good. So this is truly amazing work whose time has come not a moment too early. So Deb, what does it look like to work with you?
It's a journey. I like to say this is a journey. People can come into the KindShift experience first through our KindShift Open Circle to kind of get a sense of what that is about. It's a peer community. We offer some tools. We offer prompts and ways to reflect. And then if you decide to become part of the cohort, then you really dive into the work. So we meet twice a month. I do office hours, but it's really about coming in and just doing some of that hard work up front and the getting to your center and connect. But it's learning with each other. It's learning with other leaders like yourself, and being vulnerable to get better.
All right. And is that your cohort that's starting? Do you have a date on that?
My next cohort is starting on March 30th, and it is for women leaders. And if you're interested, please just send a DM or check out kindshift.us and you can learn more about it. And you can also learn about our circle community and just start to get a little bit more involved and learn.
All right. Very good. So this episode will air mid-March. So if you've met that deadline, go take a look in the show notes, find those links. And if it's after March 30th, you can find out what the latest that Deb's up to, again, on our website, I'm sure.
Yes. Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. Well, thank you, Deb, for bringing your wisdom, your grounding presence, and your fierce clarity into this conversation. I really enjoyed talking about this today. It's something that we all need.
Thank you, Lisa. Such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
All right. So we are living through a seismic shift in leadership, one where courage and kindness aren't opposites, but allies, where leaders don't have to be hardened to be effective, and where you don't have to abandon yourself to succeed. If Deb's words landed with you, explore her Kind Shift work, from her Compass assessment to her leadership cohort beginning this spring. The links, again, are in the show notes. Because the truth is, the leaders who will define the next decade aren't the ones gripping on to the old model. They're the ones willing to lead from their truth instead of their armor. Thanks for spending time with us today on your passion, purpose, and personal brand. And remember, in a world hungry for something real, your humanity is your strategy. We'll see you here next week.
Thanks, Lisa.